Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. It's good to have you all here. It is a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this installment of the Colin Powell School's Conversations in Leadership series. It's the first of the spring 2026 semester. As many of you know, the Colin Powell School is the home to the social sciences at the City College of New York, as well as the home of the college's public service and leadership development programs. With more than 4,000 students, we are City College's largest division, and our mission is to turn the world's most diverse student population into tomorrow's global leaders. In recent years, this speaker series has included such notable speakers as former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, journalist Gayle King, businessman and philanthropist Ray Chambers, and immigration activist Cristina Jimenez Moreta. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by a pioneer in journalism, Pulitzer Prize winner Maria Hinojosa, in conversation with author and journalist Linda Villarosa, who, to the great benefit of our students, is also a CCNY adjunct faculty member. The Conversations in Leadership series highlights leaders who have reached the pinnacle of their fields with special attention to the unconventional pathways taken to get there, much like General Powell's own story. General Powell often said that today's students reminded him of himself, a son of immigrants growing up in the Bronx. It's therefore especially fitting that today's talk takes its title from Maria's memoir, Once I Was You. Without further ado, please welcome Maria Hinojosa and Linda Villarosa.
Hello. Thank you for coming. Before we get officially started, I wanted to share our friendship origin story.
The unofficial. Before
This
we get
is
to the
my-
official, this is the unofficial.
This is my version.
Okay.
Okay.
Unredacted.
Maria was a friend of my partner at 34 years ago, and she got invited to Maria's wedding. I was not on the list, and it was very strict, because I didn't know her, it was very strict invite list. So then the wedding is super fun, so my partner calls me and she said, just come, it'll be fine. No one will notice, it's really crowded, there's music and dancing, it's great. So I'm like mortified, but I'm like, I'm going, she won't notice, no one will notice me, it doesn't matter. So I was barely in the door. Maria, in her wedding gown, comes up to me, she's about this high on me, and said, do I know you? That is how I met you.
And I don't remember a thing of that. Also, it was a purple Tehuana outfit, so it was not and we were in the basement of a Greek Orthodox church on 10th and Avenue A, so with paper cloth.
The music and food was great.
Oh, it was happening. The music was definitely happening.
Yes. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I wanted to start with, you had a really robust career in mainstream media. What made you pivot and start Latino USA?
You mean what made me pivot to start Futuro Media?
Yeah.
Because Latino USA was started in the year 1993 by Maria Martin, may she rest in peace. At that time, I was the first NPR correspondent who was a Latina. And that's where I had the robust career. Thank you for that. And in 2010, actually in 2010, I was working for a public television show called Now on PBS that was started by Bill Moyers, may he rest in peace. And after Barack Obama was elected in 2008, everybody was like, we don't need any investigative journalism on television to hold Barack Obama accountable because we just elected a black man to the presidency. Everything's great in the United States of America. Woo! We know how that went. And we can talk about Barack. I'm more than happy to discuss. So in 2010, the public television show where I was working was canceled. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I don't know if you know this story, but at that time, looking within the mainstream media, my goal was actually to work at 60 Minutes. And I got an interview with somebody at 60 Minutes. And I was like, oh my God, they're going to hire me. This is amazing. I should have known when they were like, we'll meet you at the Starbucks. That no. But anyway, I went to the meeting, and the man said to me, you know what, you're really perfect in so many ways for 60 Minutes, but I've got this long line of old white men.
He
So-
said old white men?
Yes. So can you come back when one of them gets sick or dies?
God.
Te lo juro. And I was like, is this a joke? Am I laughing? Am I not? What's happening? And I could tell that he was kind of serious and that it was kind of a joke also. So I got on the A train at 59th Street and I cried all the way to my home in Harlem. And that was when I decided to form Futuro Media. That was when I decided, like, I'm an older woman, I'm outspoken, I had this robust career, but nobody's gonna wanna hire me because I'm too old, too outspoken, too Mexican, too immigrant-y, too Latina, too everything. And people had said to me, create your own thing. And I was like, are you crazy? I'm a journalist. Why would, I don't know how to run anything. I'm a journalist. But so many people said that, Linda. And my message to you is believe it. When people see something in you and you don't see it in yourself, believe them when they see it in you. And that was what made me create Futuro Media. And I was terrified because the media in that moment, it was contracting just like it is now. It was a recession, depression. But I didn't have a job, and I wasn't gonna, it was not going well in the job hunt area. And that's why I formed Futuro Media, thinking if I could just make it to 3 years, which is the cutoff point for solid nonprofits, if I can just make it to 3 years. And here we are 15 years later. So yeah.
And how did you raise the money for it? How did you sell it? And did that go
Okay.
well?
All right, we're going straight up into it.
yeah.
Okay.
I love to talk about money.
Okay, so when people do things like form their own company and they're like, I did it, it wasn't just me, right? So people had told me, I'll work with you, I'll help you. And so also when people say that, believe them and work, get them to work with you. So we didn't have any money. I had no idea how I was going to do this, but my favorite saying from Mexican Spanish is "No hay mal que por bien no venga," which means there is no bad from which good cannot come. So I'll come back to 2010 in a second. Hold a place there. But in 2001, 9/11 happens. I'm a correspondent for CNN. I'm right up in all of it, and I end up getting PTSD. But like Linda, I was a mom of 2 kids, little ones, and who has time for PTSD? I was working, I was busy, and I didn't realize or even want to talk about PTSD, which back then was still very much like a Vietnam War thing. The Iraq War still had not happened, so PTSD was something very private and certainly for journalists. But my acupuncturist was like, look, you need to see a healer. And I was like, a healer? He was like, yeah. Sign up. She comes once a month. Come and see her. Her name is Fiona. And I was like, okay, sure. So I see Fiona, and I tell her what's going on. Actually, what was going on was that my husband wanted to move to Miami at that point. I don't know if you remember that. My husband was like, see you in New York, I'm going to Miami. And I was like, not going to Miami. And so the healer, after she did Reiki on me, and she was like, you're carrying so much mourning, because all I was doing was reporting about 9/11. And then when, as any New Yorker, I went to the reception to pay for the session, the receptionist says, Fiona does this work for free. And I was like, nobody does anything for free in New York. They were like, well, certain people are blessed with certain things, and she's blessed with the capacity to be able to do this work for free. And I saw Fiona 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 times, but I'm an investigative journalist, so I was like, who is this Fiona person? What's going on? How is she doing this? And so I found out that she was incredibly wealthy, that her husband, Stanley Druckenmiller, had funded the entire Harlem Children's Zone with, ¿cómo se llama? The guy from Harlem Children's Zone.
He was one of our graduation speakers, I'm
Yes,
forgetting.
Jeffrey
Yeah.
Canada. And that Fiona herself was actually incredibly wealthy and had gone to Barnard, where I had gone to school. So, and I did my research, and I had found out that she had actually funded a few media projects in public media. So in 2010, when I formed this, by now I had something of a relationship with Fiona, but I had never raised money, honestly, before that. But I told her, I was like, Fiona, I'm trying to create this thing. It's a nonprofit, you know, will you support me? And so Fiona became my first major donor. She's still one of our major donors, and that's what set it off. And then I went to Marguerite Casey Foundation that had funded Now on PBS. That was our first grant. And little by little, just kind of inching and opening doors, getting to the point where now we're funded by the major foundations in the country, the Ford Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, Eduardo Digo, well, all of them, you can see. But anyway, all of the main foundations are now funding us, MacArthur. And it is, apart from the journalism, that's the other thing that I do mostly, which is to raise money, open the doors to raising the money. And it's my least favorite part of the job. But one time when I was on the phone asking for money, and I was saying, oh, please forgive me that I'm asking you for money. And this guy said, don't ever ask for forgiveness. You are not asking for money for you. You're asking for money for your project, which is incredibly important for American history, et cetera. And I was like, okay. And then he wrote a big check. And then he became a part of our board, and then he turned MAGA.
Oh, I didn't see that coming.
On the U.S.-Mexico border, and he was responsible for turning part of the U.S.-Mexico, the Rio Grande Valley, red. Okay, applause. Okay.
Red is bad. All right. As journalists, you kind of talked about, alluded to this, that we were taught to sort of like we're covering wars, and also that we have to have what's called both sidism. So how would you say you have evolved as a journalist to the moment we're in now?
Well, actually, I just did an interview with Tom Llamas, who is the new anchor of the NBC Evening News. And Tom's perspective on this is that he wants to be middle of the road. And I was like, middle of the road in the United States in the year 2026. What does that look like? And honestly, I was frustrated by this position because I think it's a dangerous position of journalists of conscience. And so I asked him, I was like, so are there two sides to children being kept in cages? What are the both sides? To which he responded that, well, there's the question of human rights, and then there's everything else. And I was just like, okay, that was a way to evade the question. There are certain things, and I think that as journalists of conscience, and I consider that my godfather of American journalism of conscience is Frederick Douglass. If you haven't been to his statue on 110th Street, please go. And that's when I realized that there is a history of journalism of conscience in our country. Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, Jovita Hidar, on and on. Even, Ed Bradley from 60 Minutes. And that what you realize then is that you have a larger context, and that you don't fall into, well, there's two sides to every story. that you understand that as journalists, our role is actually to clarify and to give facts, right? So I was teaching, because also I'm Mexican, I have 16 different jobs, so I just came from my other job, which is teaching at my alma mater at Barnard, and I wrote on the board, as I often do, I said, there is no such thing as an illegal human being. And I want you to know that when Linda and I were first starting out in our careers of journalism, and I would manifest how uncomfortable I was using the term illegal immigrant, illegal alien that they made me use. And because of the fact that I was so vocal on the issue of we shouldn't be using this term, illegal, I was labeled as a rebel and a radical in the newsroom. And actually, for some people, distrusted and called un-American. So in that sense, it's like there are not two sides to the issue of, are you an illegal alien, illegal immigrant? And I didn't learn to never use that term from a radical Latino, Latina studies professor. I actually learned it from Elie Wiesel, who survived the Holocaust. And when I met him and I asked him, it was interesting, Linda, I met him at CNN, and I made a beeline to him, and I don't even know why I asked him this question, but the question was, Mr. Wiesel, do you think it's correct to use the term illegal immigrant to refer to immigrants without documents? And he said, Maria, never use the term illegal to refer to a human being. That is the first thing that the Nazis did, was to declare the Jews to be an illegal people. And now all of us in this room are bearing witness to what is the result of a term being used over and over and over in a newsroom that we're being told is the appropriate term by people who have this kind of, well, two sides to every story, and aren't they illegal kind of perspective, instead of actually drilling down and doing the hard work of critical journalism to say, one, illegal is not a noun, so illegal immigrant, it's grammatically incorrect. And two, to understand that if you open the doors to defining an entire group illegal, we get to where we are now. But it cost me. It cost me a lot.
And can you offer sort of a critique, I guess, about how the media is covering immigration right now?
Well, so it's interesting because, you know, I've covered immigration. The very first piece I ever did for NPR when I was an intern at All Things Considered in 1985 was about the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. So my career started by covering immigrants. One, at that time, people thought that I was very biased because I was an immigrant. So it's like, yeah, we're, okay. But I was fighting against a lot of pressure because it was like, well, who cares? Who cares about immigrants? Also, they are all illegal, so they don't really deserve to be spoken about. It was an invisible, in many ways, it felt like the issue of immigration was somewhat invisible. And now that's not the case, right? Everybody in our country knows about ICE. And a majority of the country now, no matter what party affiliation they come from, now actually thinks that ICE should go away. So the Abolish ICE movement actually hasn't had to do a lot of work recently because ICE is doing it to themselves. So I'm actually really, I'm like, finally, whew, finally y'all are talking about this. But no doubt every day when I wake up and I'm doing my early morning doom scrolling, I'm sitting there saying, we tried to warn you, I tried to warn you. We were talking about this, we were saying this, we were raising the red flag. And immigrants, undocumented immigrants, in fact now we understand have turned out to be the canaries in the mine. It was on our bodies that the country was going to test how far this country would go to deny due process to a human being. And now we know how far they're prepared to go, which is to shoot Silverio Villegas, the first person shot by ICE in Chicago in September, October, and now Renee Good and Alex Preddy. So we know now the consequences of believing that due process should be denied to people. So it's finally being talked about. I find it very interesting that this is a story that I've been covering for decades, and yet I'm no longer seen as an expert. Kind of interesting. And I think that because of the coverage that we're seeing now, I was asked recently, do you think that mainstream journalists need to have more empathy for immigrants as they're covering the immigration story? And I said, no, we don't need empathy, we need respect. So we have come some ways forward, but we have a lot of work to do. But again, as I said, they're doing it unto themselves. So ICE we'll see how it goes, because also the Democrats, hello. But will it just be ICE that is abolished? Will it include the Border Patrol to be redone? And will it go so far as to deconstruct the Department of Homeland Security, which was created after, well, I don't know, let's see, I don't know how old any of you are anymore, but it was created after 9/11. So the Department of Homeland Security is not permanent, it can also go away. So again, no hay mal que por bien no venga, there will be some good that comes of it, but the horror is real, and not all of us are gonna make it.
In 2024, 50%, almost 50% of Latinos voted for Trump, which was the highest number of percentage for a Republican in history. Did you see that coming, and what do you make of it?
We did see it coming because we spent 2023, what year, whatever, the year leading up to the election, we were on the ground. And I've been talking about the power of the Latino voter, which is true. What I didn't really understand was how Latinos and Latinas saw themselves as white, or wanting to be white, or wanting to be proximate to whiteness. And what do I mean by this? So many Latinos and Latinas believed the myths and disinformation that they were being told about themselves. And we got to this point of like, well, good immigrant, bad immigrant. Well, I'm a good immigrant, he's a bad immigrant, so Donald Trump is only gonna do this to the bad immigrants. Unable to see that Donald Trump and all of MAGA see them just by being immigrants, just by being Latino and Latina at this point, as a threat to the country. So, I forgot the question.
It was about MAGA, like
So, right, so,
yeah.
so I do understand it. It was, also there's the whole question of the evangelical vote, which for Latinos and Latinas is really important. And I would encounter people who would say, well, I'm formally undocumented, but now I have my citizenship. I'm evangelical, but my boyfriend is undocumented, but I think I want to vote for Donald Trump. And I would say, and why? And they were like, well, the issue of abortion. So, yeah, you were like, what? And yes, it's like, so you are prepared to vote to save an unborn baby in a pregnancy that may not have been wanted, instead of protecting human beings that are alive and right around you. And we saw that the abortion issue was big, and we talked about this on Latino USA. We covered the story in New Mexico. But the point of the story is, yes, Linda, I did see this coming, and I think that now there is a lot of self-criticism that is being had among Latino and Latina voters, and the latest I've heard from some is that they are so upset about the fact that they voted for Donald Trump that they cannot wait until November comes. And that notion of like, oh my God, I can't wait until November, I don't know if I've heard that kind of expression for the midterms. So we will see what happens. Our democracy is in peril. We know that, right? Like the actual process of being able to vote without threat is an issue right now in our country. So we shall see how it goes.
You mentioned disinformation. Can you talk about it, how it was specifically targeted to Latinos, and also kind of how, as consumers, we can avoid that?
All right, so on the issue of mis and disinformation, so all of us are susceptible, so don't feel bad if you kind of end up consuming some mis and disinformation or maybe even repeating. It happens to the best of us. But when you see something that makes you have an emotional reaction, that's probably a sign to take a pause and maybe not repost, but to actually look. I mean, we know the basics of media literacy, right? You have to triple source anything that you see. What do we mean by triple source? You're checking on 3 different sources to make sure that what you just heard is true. And those triple sources can be anything that is an established and overwhelmingly trusted news outlet. So Al Jazeera, BBC, even though I know many of you are critical of the New York Times, also the New York Times. You choose what 3 you want. But many of us don't know the basics of media literacy. It's not taught in our schools. It is taught in some schools in Europe, but it's not taught in our schools. So people get roped in by these images. For example, we became interested in telling the story of how is this happening. And one of the ways that it happens is with YouTube influencers in Spanish, Spanish language. And so my producer, who I was just traveling with overseas, Nur, we found 2 influential YouTubers in Spanish. And she was like, I'm going to make a request to give us an interview. And I was like, they're never going to speak to us. I was wrong. They were like, yeah, we'll speak to you. And I was like, okay. So both of them Venezuelan, both of them Spanish language, both of them not based in the United States, nor with the possibility of having a green card or citizenship, both of them making money off of YouTube, off of repeating the mis and disinformation that they were getting handed down from essentially MAGA and others in the Republican Party. So one of them said he was based in Reykjavik, Iceland, and we were like, well, we'll go interview you in Reykjavik. He said no. So we already had some questions. And then the other one was based outside of London. And he said yes to go do the interview. So off we went to London. And I don't know how often you've been bullied in interviews. Have you been bullied in interviews?
A few times.
A few times, but
Yeah.
they're memorable when it happens.
Terrible.
Yeah, Sheriff Joe Arpaio from Arizona bullied me. I'll never forget that. But, it's not something that usually happens. This guy from YouTube was bullying me. And I was like, what is going on? And he was coming after me. He was like, well, Maria, before I answered your question, you need to know that in Twitter in the year blah, 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 you said this and you posted this and you have to, and I was like, and then I got my bearings and I said, and I stopped him and I said, you know what? You did not make a request to interview me, and I didn't say yes. But I made a request to interview you, and you said yes. So now you have to be quiet. You have to let me do my interview, and after we're done, I'll consider your request whether or not you want to interview me. Are we good? And I'm a boxer, so I kind of came at him, and he was like, "All right, as long as you give me 10 minutes at the end." I was like, "Sure, I'll give you 10 minutes at the end," and of course I didn't. As soon as we finished, I was like, "Thank you very much, goodbye." So the way that they lied, and they lied because they were making money ultimately off of this. The more viewers they got on YouTube, the more money that they were making. And so that's basically how it looks. You get this YouTube information, then you're sharing it with all your family and friends on WhatsApp. then the whole WhatsApp is going crazy and repeating all of these things. Like, for example, how many of you saw the picture of Kamala Harris in full Communist Party regalia? Any of you? In South Florida, that image was being seen everywhere. And all of the Latinos and Spanish language speakers that you met would be like, no, esa Kamala es una comunista. And you would turn on the radio and you would hear that. Esa Kamala es una comunista. And it was a doctored photograph that wasn't real. And I remember at some point saying, I can't remember to who, but I was like, you know, the Harris campaign has to respond to this. Like, this is taking off like wildfire among Spanish language Latino and Latina voters. And they were like, we'll never address this because it would be silly. Well, if you don't address it, it continues to take off. So the problem has not been solved. But I do know that what we have experienced as a country, and certainly in places like Los Angeles, Seattle, Minneapolis, Chicago, where ICE has come and in a frontal way has been the response of many people taking to the streets, and many Latinos and Latinas, certainly in Los Angeles, leading that cause. So lives have been changed as a result of what's happening now, and eyes have been opened, and I just can't wait to see what happens from the result of all of these young people getting involved in street politics. Because usually, oh, by the way, I always like to remind people, Barack Obama helped to take over Hamilton Hall on Columbia campus in the year 1984-85. For 3 weeks, they closed Hamilton Hall, took it over, chained the doors shut, in order to demand institutional divestment from South Africa and apartheid. Nelson Mandela was still in prison. So street protest, campus protests, I know that many students are being expelled, suspended, et cetera, but many of those students are going to grow to be incredible leaders in our country. So I'm looking forward to that. But there's a lot of work to be done, and I would just say, take on in your own families the issue of mis and disinformation. Don't be afraid to have those conversations with your family now more than ever. I know it's hard. But we need to block that mis and disinformation in every way possible. And in fact, at some point in the election, somebody said, yeah, you know, Futuro Media is not just doing journalism. You're actually actively counteracting the mis and disinformation. And I hadn't really thought of ourselves as that, but now we understand that we are, in fact.
I love that. Sometimes I hate read essays about the end of journalism. Can you talk about the value of both journalism education and going into the profession?
Well, again, when I think of, you know, oh my God, this is so hard, I just talk to Frederick. If Frederick Douglass could survive, born into slavery, worked to get his freedom, then becomes the first editor-in-chief and publisher of the first black newspaper, the North Star. If he could do that, then I can. And so this whole notion of journalism is over and dead, I mean, again, that was being said in 2008, 2009, 2010. That's when Futuro is born. So there are careers in journalism that are not only being on the front line as a journalist. I actually just had Joe Torres speaking to my class, and he co-wrote the book, News for All the People, History of Journalists of Color in the United States. Yes, journalism is being threatened, but Joe helped me to understand, again, the structural element of American mainstream journalism, and this is where it gets a little ugly and uncomfortable, right? Which is that essentially, and it's just factual, right? Overwhelmingly, all of our mainstream news media is owned and operated by white men. And many white men are our best friends. We love, they're like, yes. But also, they have an interest, right? What do I mean? So for them, for example, they could easily use the term illegal immigrant because they're like, well, isn't that the right term? Aren't they? And it's like, no, actually, that is your bias that you're carrying. And so the whole notion of objectivity, it's like, well, who is the God of objectivity? Like when you have a real editorial problem, like who's the God that you go to? Who's going to be perfectly objective? Walter Cronkite? I mean, may he rest in peace. He was one of my heroes. But even Walter Cronkite would say that he carried bias. So I'm very enthusiastic because, as Joe Torres said to me, it's not only just journalism, journalists in the front line. There are, he was like, please do the academic work, get a PhD, study the history of journalism and journalists of conscience, journalists of color. He was like, become those people who help to write the policy around journalism in our United States. There's everything's going to have to be thrown out. We're going to have to start all over again. How we do that, I don't know. It's going to be tough, but this is not going to remain. How do we rebuild a CBS News? I don't know. How do we rebuild an NBC, where you now have Tom Llamas doing a softball interview with Trump? All of us are going to have to be a part of that rebuilding. And if not, you're creating your own expressions of media and journalism. So I'm really hopeful for all of you. So try not to read those pieces that Linda's reading about the death of journalism.
In the middle of the night.
Worse, in the middle of the night. Instead, trust your gut about what you want to do and the stories that you want to tell and how you want to tell them. Is it easy? No. Is it scary? Yes. I'm like, well, you know, I waited tables when I first started as a journalist. I'll always go back to waiting tables if I need to. So don't give up. And learn how to wait tables also.
You mentioned to me that you just came back from Gaza. Can you...
Not Gaza, the West Bank.
The West Bank, sorry. So what did you see that we may not know?
Oh my God. Does anybody here consider themselves well informed about the situation in the West Bank, the occupied territories, Israel? You do? Okay, good. But the majority of you did not. And I did not consider myself an expert. So the question that we are asking in our reporting, and we were asked to be a part of a group of students and professors going to meet with students and professors in the West Bank, in Palestine. And we set out to answer the question, or to ask the question, why does the issue of Gaza and Palestine resonate so deeply with Latinos and Latinas? Because I do a show called Latino USA. And we're going to come up with, we have 7 days of extraordinary reporting. Let's see. I'll just tell you what Noor, so Noor Saudi is my producer. She is Palestinian from Brooklyn and now Staten Island. And Noor, in her notes back, she just got back this morning. I got back on Monday night. And she was saying that she was and she's traveled to the region in the past, and she was very taken by my reaction to what I was seeing. Because there are walls throughout the occupied territories. Walls, like the wall between the United States and Mexico. Walls that are now 30 feet high with razor wire at the top. It would be like a wall dividing Staten Island from New Jersey or Queens from Brooklyn. To have a wall internally in our city, for example, or to have checkpoints where only certain people are being checked, and where racial profiling is absolutely the law of the land. And Noor was very taken by my reaction to seeing the walls in the occupied territories and saying, but what is this doing here? This looks exactly like the wall between the United States and Mexico. What are these checkpoints that look like immigration checkpoints that you have when you're driving north from the US-Mexico border wall? I think that the other thing that I was really intent on documenting specifically for my daughter, who wanted to come on the trip but wasn't able to, is to show that, so Gaza, right? Gaza is on the coast, right? And it is a walled off area. You cannot get in or out of Gaza. So let's just make that clear. You can't get in or out. If you're in Gaza, you can't get out unless you have a special permission, usually for a health issue. Otherwise, you can't get in or out. And as we know, more journalists have been killed covering Gaza than any in modern history. But what I also wanted to show is that I was in Palestine. I was in Ramallah. I was in Bethlehem. And life is going on. There's a vibrancy of life. There are cafes. There are high rises. You have a society where you have poorer Palestinians and super wealthy Palestinians. And people are building their cities and their universities. We visited the largest private university in Palestine, Birzeit, that has 14,000 students that are getting engineering degrees. And now they're opening a medical school. So I wanted to show that there's life, because there's this image when this is covered as like, oh my God, that's like scary, dangerous, everything's falling apart. No. Yes, there are scary, terrible things that are happening that are illegal, because the United Nations has declared the settlers and the settlements as illegal. Basically, it would be like the settlers, it would be kind of like, let me see, what would be a parallel? Like if Manhattanites said about Brooklyn, well, we were here first in Manhattan, and now we want to go into Brooklyn, so we're just going to come in and take over your house, which you have a really beautiful house. And I would just be like, you know what, Linda? It's mine, because we're Manhattanites, and we deserve it, and so get the hell out. Like, ¿qué es esto? No, that's why the United Nations has declared these to be illegal. And that's why there's so much violence that happens, because then they are protected by the Israeli military for doing this. So it's very complicated. I have faith that something good will happen. And the Palestinians that we spoke to said, you know, our mission right now is to preach for nonviolence, to make it clear who we are, that we love education, that getting our high school, they have to take a test to graduate from high school, and this is like a big deal for many, many Palestinians. They're like, we want to make it clear that education matters to us, that we are modern intellectual thinkers who are creating many things in our cities. So it was very important for me to also share this. Like, it is not, also my students, right, who come into class, and this is at Barnard, right, and they're like, oh God, this is terrible, life is terrible. You know? And I'm like, stop, okay? The people of Palestine, they wake up happy and determined to be alive. And that is, as they say, it's just our resistance is just being here. So enough of this, we have to be happy to be alive, and that has to give us the strength every day. Now, is it easy? No. Are they sad that their people have been killed? Yes. But this notion of celebrating life and feeling responsible for giving back to this life is something that I'm bringing with me, and that I want to share with all of you. It's going to be amazing reporting. I don't know how we're going to do it, because it's part travelogue, part, dystopian thriller, because a lot of things happen that I can't talk about right now because we're going to reveal them, but, a lot of fascinating things and also uncomfortable things happened. And what we do realize is that the relationship of Latin America and Latinos writ large to the area of Palestine is actually historic and goes deep, deep, deep. So we're going to have And nobody's asking that question, so the journalism is going to be excellent. Excellent.
Ooh,
Yeah, it's going to be good.
wow, that's a scoop.
Yes, it is.
Before we open it up to the audience, I wanted to ask, you're busy, you travel, you cover hard things. I love the positive spirit, but also, how do you take care of your physical and emotional health? Besides boxing.
Boxing's important. I was boxing at 6:30 in the morning today because I woke up at 3:30 in the morning because I'm on jet lag. So I'm just like, okay, what am I doing? Look, first of all, dear students, there is no nirvana. So if you're like, oh my God, by the time I turn 30, everything's going to be figured out. Or then you hit 30 and you're like, okay, by the time I turn 40, it's all going to be, and then you're like, okay, by the time I turn 50, no, it doesn't happen. You don't get to the point where everything is like settled in your life, right? There are just other challenges, so therefore you need to be prepared for the long run. So that means you're not exhausting yourself. So when, like right now, I'm in this exact period of coming out of a somewhat traumatic experience, and having been in another kind of traumatic experience right before I left on this trip. So the way I process it is actually, I meditate every day. Today I'm at 2,233 days straight, but who's counting? Me. So I also was that person when I was told a decade ago, oh, you just need to do yoga and meditate. And I was like, stop with the yoga and meditation. And actually, I cannot tell you how important meditation is. So try it. There are a lot of free apps. Just go to all the free apps until you find one that works for you. Do it before you get out of bed. Stay in bed and just, you can listen. And now I meditate with my students. Before every class, we meditate together. Because I want them to know it's not about being, again, in a nirvana, but rather just staying with the sitting to know that you can control your mind. And it's not easy, right? Like I was up in the middle of the night saying to myself, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, trying to get myself to sleep. It didn't work, so it's not like it's going to solve all of your problems. But meditating is actually really, really important to me. And then after I do a short meditation, then oftentimes what I'll do is I'll put on a kind of meditative music, whether it's chanting or, whatever, and I'll just have that on in the background as I'm making my coffee, as I'm brushing my teeth, and then when I'm boxing, I'm not listening to that. But the boxing and the weightlifting is actually really important also to staying centered. I've become a birder after the pandemic, so, actually connecting to nature writ large, birds specifically, eagles in very specificity. My puppy, Benito Juarez, he's brown, just like Benito Juarez, our first indigenous president. Also, Benito Juarez said another one of my favorite sayings, which is, el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz. When I heard this as a little girl, I was like, that's a lot of mumbo jumbo, I don't know what. El respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz, which means respect for other people's rights is peace. So you're Muslim, you're trans, you're an immigrant, you're queer, you're what? Mis respetos. And then you respect me and we have peace, right? Give everybody their space. Yeah, connecting with nature, having downtime. Yeah, I'm sorry, I really do have a detox kind of diet, so I stopped eating all processed foods. It's possible. It takes a lot because we are all addicted to it, but you can break the addiction because that helps. Like if you're really just adding, and by the way, I loved Cheetos. They were like my safe food. Gone, no more Cheetos. And just giving myself a little bit of time, not demanding from myself to be healed. Like right now I'm like, damn, this was some crazy stuff. What am I gonna do? So just finding some time for quiet, walking the dog. This weekend I'm going to be able to get out of the city, even though I just got back. And so being in nature, being in silence, except for the birds, listening to the birds. But most important is realizing that you really have got to pace yourselves, because this is the forever struggle for democracy in our country, which is like the core, right? Because I wasn't born in this country. So democracy wasn't a given for me. And so understanding that that is lifelong, but so is the process of finding joy and dancing. And you didn't come to my party.
I'm sorry. I did miss it.
I just realized that's...
Oh, see, this is what happens.
Yeah.
You didn't... What are you doing here? Do I know you?
And then you didn't come. And now you didn't come.
It's
So I have a huge party, which I can invite you all, but
It's
it is
fun.
in Morningside Park. It is later June on a Saturday, so you figure it out. But so bringing together, we did line dancing outdoors. We have a big DJ, free pupusas, although I'm so poor now that I don't know if I can do free anymore. And the reason why I'm talking about that is because actually my personal economy has been very much affected by Donald Trump. Why? I don't know if you're experiencing the same thing, but whatever I felt about Hispanic Heritage Month, I was not a big month celebrator, but now I'm like, there is no Hispanic Heritage Month. Therefore, I'm no longer invited to give speeches for Hispanic Heritage Month, speeches where I would get paid. Gone. Adios. Ciao. Therefore, my party is going to have to be a budget party. But it is about the coming together and finding that joy, because that's the stuff that we need to do for the other part. And again, going back to the Palestinian people, right, who have been in this struggle, we laughed a lot. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of joy. We didn't dance, which is the one thing we didn't do. And so we have to remember that, right? It is about owning our laughter and our joy and not feeling guilty about that. Guilt is a worthless emotion. So just prepare yourselves for the long haul. And if you want to talk about those basic things that I do, also you can just follow me on Instagram, where I love to post about the birds and the workouts and the meditation.
questions. I think we have a mic.
Hi, Maria.
Hi.
My name is Nixon Fedrick. I'm a student here at City College, currently majoring in economics. First of all, thank you so much for spreading your wisdom tonight. I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts. One of my questions for you is about when you first started Futuro. Could you walk us through how difficult it was in the beginning to start Futuro? The reason why I'm asking is because there's a lot of us in this room that are interested in starting nonprofits or companies that would like to change the world in the future. So I wanted to know, in the beginning, how did you get over that hurdle of starting the company?
Wow. I mean, it's really scary. So, and I talk very openly about being afraid and being scared about how to do this. Most important thing is to be clear on what you want to do and really trust your gut on this, right? Trust your gut on, we want to create our own nonprofit to do media literacy in Central Harlem. I'm making that up. But you commit to that. You commit to that project, and you're working on the project, and the work itself is what you're going to be able to then write the grant that then you submit to whatever foundation that then ends up getting you that support. It's not going to be easy at first. Very important that you find people who have experience. So for example, I had never been on a board, a nonprofit. Well, actually I had been on a board, but that was many, many years ago. So we needed to put together a board. Finding people who had experience, who knew what they were talking about, who had been involved with nonprofits, because I didn't have experience in nonprofits. So forming a board, your elders, your professors, who are going to believe in you is really important. And also not giving up quickly. Do you know how many trials and tribulations Futuro Media has been through? It's been really tough. But we are so committed to the kind of journalism that we do, which is journalism with heart. Like, for example, this reporting that we're going to be doing out of our trip to Palestine. So there were a lot of heavy moments, but also we're going to make sure that we're going to make you laugh while you're also listening to this. Because one of the things that happened was that I packed very badly for the trip, and I didn't take any walking shoes, and all we were doing was walking. And so it was like, how is Maria Hinojosa going to get a pair of new tennis shoes in Palestine while we're also doing all of this stuff? So where are my shoes? Or the fact that Nur, my producer, couldn't sleep. She was only sleeping 2 hours a night. So these were like the funny things that would come up, and they don't sound funny, but it was funny in the moment. So we will make the piece into a very human story that then you're going to identify with, that then is going to make you feel something. That's the journalism that we are committed to doing, which, by the way, was journalism that was highly criticized, right? You know. So just remain really committed to the idea that you have, but definitely rely on your elders to guide you and try not to give up. I know it sounds like, but you got to find the people who have been in this before you to help make sure that you're like, it's okay. It's going to be rough, but one foot in front of the other. And actually, I'll tell you this. This is a funny story. Not so funny, sort of. I was raising money, as usual, and I was speaking to a Latina who ran or runs, a multi-million-dollar business. I was asking her for money. She was like, I'm not giving you any money. So you have to be prepared to get turned down, because it happens a lot. And she was like, I can't give you any money. She was so wealthy, but was not going to give us any money. But I can give you a piece of advice on what you need to do to make it through this. And I was like, okay, I'll take the free advice. She was like, never stop breathing. I was like, what? I didn't say the B word, but almost. Like, are you serious? And she was like, when you scuba dive, if you've ever scuba dived, the first thing that they teach you is when you put on that mask, you cannot stop breathing. And you're like, well, obviously, we're always breathing. But sometimes we go like this. Or you hold your breath. You're like, you can't do that when you're scuba diving. You cannot stop the in and out because you can die, actually. So she was like, just remember to breathe. And I remember I wanted to slap her. I swear. But in the end, it was actually really important. In other words, we are not dying by running a nonprofit newsroom. Feels scary. Things can happen that are really difficult, but we're not facing death. And therefore, again, I go back to Frederick. I'm like Frederick was breathing in and out every day. And so you have to kind of remain that calm so that you can carry through. But is it going to be a roller coaster? Absolutely. But then here we are, 15 years later, with a Pulitzer and a Peabody and 2 Emmy nominations. Am I humble bragging? Yes, I am.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, I am. Absolutely. Not for the applause. It's not for the applause, but it does help, as Linda knows, when you walk into a room now, because any of those guys who wanted to challenge me and still try, it's very easy. I'm just like, well, where's your Pulitzer? Okay? It's fun to be able to say that. Yes.
Hello.
Hola.
Well, first of all, very nice to meet you, Maria. My name is Francisca, and I'm from Chile. So I wanted to ask
And wait, I need to tell you this. Did you know that Chile
is the biggest world outside of the Arab, it's the biggest country outside of the Arab world that has the highest population of Palestinians.
Who knew? Outside of Palestine, it's Chile, y'all.
Yes.
Chile. Okay.
So I wanted to ask you, because it's more of a personal question. I really admire you, and I was able to see your Instagram stories, so I'm very excited about what your team comes out with. But I am 32 years old, and I'm just starting again with my undergraduate program in journalism.
Bravo.
Thank you. I'm also a
Yes.
mom. So pretty much I wanted to ask you, what would be your words of advice as an immigrant and also as a woman who's very, I guess, sorry, I'm thinking about the word, insecure about my accent and sometimes where I come from, because at the end of the day, my life in the United States, I've been living here since I was 21 years old and I'm 32, so pretty much all my adult life I've been here. But I guess I struggle when it comes to, for example, getting internships. How am I supposed to talk? How am I supposed to act in a culture that is not mine? And also add to that I'm older and I'm also a mom. And yeah, so what would you say about
listen,
that?
you could run circles around any of those media executives because of what you've done. So you need to, ¿cómo te llamas?
Francisca.
Tú, Francisca, you need to talk to yourself and say, coño, ¿qué kind of badass soy yo?
Yeah.
That I'm doing this at 32 with a kid and I'm getting... So you need to own that power. And that's the energy that you come in with, not in an arrogant way,
Yeah.
but yeah, sometimes a little arrogant. Maybe you're going to get turned down from the internships. You just keep, and it's
Yeah.
hell out there,
Yes.
okay?
I
We know
noticed.
this. But you got to keep on trying. And those things that you see as your weaknesses, I would say are your absolute strengths.
Thank you.
So the fact that you are everything that you just mentioned means that you come into the newsroom even more equipped. So when you're applying for those internships, you can say, look, not only am I an older graduate getting my BA in my second career, but also I'm a mother. And so I bring all of that into the newsroom. I'm going to be the smartest journalist in this newsroom because of the fact that I have all of this information about living in this country only for 10 years, growing up in Chile, where the first 9/11 happened in 1973. So it may not connect with everybody, but somewhere along the line, someone is going to say, oh, no, ella, she's got and you've got to have the ganas, right, the grit. So don't walk around thinking about, and I mean, I had it too. I wrote about this in Once I Was You, the imposter syndrome, always thinking that you're not good enough. It exists. I'll just tell you, I ask this question to almost everybody who I interview, especially big names, like, so how do you deal with your moments of insecurity or doubt? Rita Moreno, who I think is 90, por ahí 90, West Side Story, if you don't know who I'm talking about. I really thought that Bad Bunny needed to bring her out. That's the one where I was like,
Yes.
come on,
I do
Bad
have to say that I got excited when I saw Toñita. That was really
Claro,
nice.
Toñita, but Rita Moreno should have been there
Yeah.
dancing with him.
That's
it would have
true.
made sense. But so when I asked Rita Moreno, who is one of the first EGOTs, right? Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. I think she has a Peabody and a Lifetime SAG Award. So she's, and she was about to receive her Lifetime Achievement from SAG. She was going to be on live television in front of who knows how many millions of viewers receiving the award. And she was going to sing a cappella. She was telling me this. It was going to happen 2 days from then. And I said, so what do you do when you get nervous? She says, of course I get nervous. And when I hear that little voice that's telling me, ¿qué? You're going to sing a cappella on live television? Are you crazy? Who do you think you are, Rita? She says that she names the little voice. So she gave her full name, Rita Maria Conchita Jesus Moreno Palacios. Y te vas a tu cuarto. And she says, she sends her to her room, and she says, and the door is locked. You are not to come out of your room, which is on the upper part of her brain. Door is locked, won't hear you, which I just love. That's her way of dealing with it. So everybody has it. Most people are carrying around some level of insecurity. And if they're not, sometimes they can be fascists.
I agree. Thank you so much.
So own all of that. That is your brilliance.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. My name is Natalie. The question that I have for you is, how do you balance lighthearted journalism with very intense journalism, especially when covering Latino communities? Because in a time like this where ICE is so prevalent, there's so much fear and tension in those communities. So where do you find that balance between lightheartedness and just
You mean like what
feel
we're
good?
covering, what we're
Yes.
covering, the decisions
Yeah.
that we make?
Feel good stories
Yeah,
as
yeah,
opposed
yeah.
to just very tense.
Well, we've actually had to really deal with this at Latino USA because we could be the Debbie Downer of every week, right? Because being Latino and Latina in the United States of America right now is being a target. For real. We know that. We understand it now. So we, again, we trust our gut as to how do we bring in the fact that we're living life even amidst all of this. So I'll just give you a recent example that I was pretty adamant in doing. There's a new book called Being Bruja, and it's a young adult guide to being a bruja, to learning how to be a witch. And I was very intrigued because it's for young adults, and it's kind of like the basics. And my team was a little bit like, are you really? And I was like, yes, let's, because also I have to pitch my own stories within my own company and convince my own team about the stories that I want to do. So journalists are always going to have to be pitching. We need to own that. So I ended up finally, it took a few months, but they finally, my team said, okay, we're going to do this interview. And it was a great interview. She ended up doing a limpia on me when I was on the floor in the studio with the egg, and this became a whole part of the interview. And it's done really well. I mean, we also interviewed a ¿de dónde es ella? Argentina, española, Nati Peluso, who is like a rapera. And so we had a lot of fun just talking about music and feminism. I'm too tired now, but I'd have to go back and look and see at some of the lighter things that we've done. But we are actually very much in that process of being in the mix. We know, I have right now, one of our producers is doing a story about Hello Kitty and Latina's obsession with Hello Kitty, which I didn't know about. So a whole story about Hello Kitty and Latinas. So we're doing that because that's also who we are. So we're actively doing that as we look at our calendar, as we're blocking things out, because that is part of our entirety of experience in the United States, right? Okay, another humble brag. I do this a lot, but I always warn you. I just got a text from Gustavo Dudamel's PR. So Gustavo Dudamel is going to be taking over the New York Philharmonic. He is from Venezuela. I don't know if you've seen him. He's got all the curly hair, and he conducts in a very intense way. And so his person was just like, just relaying, we'd like to invite you to the opening night. I'm like, yes! That means we're getting an interview with Gustavo Dudamel, where we're going to be with him as he's directing classical music, conducting classical music, right? And he's a very funny and hopeful guy. So that is like a natural for us. But, you know, we also just did a major documentary about being on the front lines in Chicago and LA with the ICE targets. We weren't able to get to Minneapolis. Just we couldn't make it work with everybody's schedules. Otherwise, we would have been there. But also the team realizes, like, we also can't burn out, right? We cannot burn out. And yet at the same time, Latinos and Latinas, we are the breaking news story of every single day. So it is very much a part of our editorial programming to understand that we have to do the great, deep journalism, critical journalism, but also match that with making people laugh and smile and feel good about life. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Hello.
Hi.
Is this working? Hello, nice to meet you. Thank you for speaking. I had questions of clarity. Number one, you had mentioned that how it was kind of hard for you to be a journalist because you couldn't keep your bias or something like that.
Well, it wasn't hard for me, it was hard for other people.
Okay. Yeah.
I was good.
Okay. How were you able to yourself when talking about things like immigration?
How was I able to what?
Keep your bias when talking about things like illegal immigration, because you had mentioned how you had been influenced by Elie Wiesel, and that led you to sort of not you want to use the word illegal, but in other countries they use that word illegals. Like
It doesn't
in
make
the
it right.
DR,
Yeah.
in DR they call it
Oh,
Haitians illegals.
pero
but-
claro, the Dominican Republic loves to say, we use the term illegal because we learned it from the United States. It doesn't make it correct. It is an inappropriate term wherever it's being used.
Despite the fact of what these people are doing.
Who people?
'Cause the
You mean
illegal
undocumented people?
Illegal immigrants, yeah.
Okay, so first of all,
There
I
was a
don't,
14-year-old that killed a Dominican boy. There was a Haitian who killed an illegal Haitian who killed a Dominican boy who was 14, and that doesn't reach headlines at all.
well, that's, whether or not it reaches headlines is one question, but the question of terminology is another one. So, I do not accept the notion of a person being illegal, which I think you do. I don't. And specifically on the question of the island of Hispaniola, that's another place where they want to build the wall on the island to keep the Haitians away from the Dominicans. And in the Dominican Republic, because I went to do the story actually, both for radio and for television, of the roundups. And they were thrilled to say that they used the term illegal because they learned it from the United States. In every single situation in the world, you are going to find an element of criminality, whether or not that person has documents or not. But what we do know in the United States is that undocumented immigrants commit less crime than people who were born here, and I would say it would go the same for the Haitians in the Dominican Republic. I spend a lot of time in the Dominican Republic. The Haitian people who I know in the Dominican Republic are the hardest working and most trustworthy that I know. I know you're making a frown, but it is my experience being married to a Dominican man and having a home in the Dominican Republic that was built by Haitian construction workers who we paid. Many times they don't even get paid. But what we know about undocumented immigrants in the United States is that they commit less crime than those who have papers. So we also know by data that the United States does not have a crime problem. I would venture to say that the Dominican Republic does also not have a crime problem. I'm not an expert, so I'll have to get my facts, okay? But here, all of the election was based on the criminal immigrants, which is not true. We now know the data of what just happened in Minneapolis. I don't think I reposted it, but the millions of dollars that were spent to round up thousands of people, of which I think a minuscule number actually had felony charges. The overwhelming majority had no criminal record whatsoever, period. So the issue of criminality is being used as a cover for going after people who don't have documents. And you know what, my dear? That is unsustainable. Building a wall between Haiti and the Dominican Republic is unsustainable as a policy. The Dominican Republic survives with the labor of the Haitian people every single day. And the United Nations has declared what the Dominican Republic has done as illegal, which is to not allow people to have statehood, depending, even if they were born. So in case you don't know this, if you are a Haitian immigrant to the Dominican Republic and you give birth to a child in the DR will not give your child documents, so you become stateless, and this again has been declared by the United Nations to be an illegal act. So,
So,
I don't know.
so,
I don't know. 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 I So yeah, we can talk about that more if you'd like.
Last question.
Hi, Maria. Okay. So I wanted to know, you talked about conscious journalism and
Journalists of conscience.
journalists of conscious. I was wondering if you can tell us maybe 3 things that you say constitutes a journalist of conscience, because I feel like a lot of people may be pulled to maybe start in that field or partake in that. So what are 3 things that we can start doing or have so we can stay on track to make sure we are journalists of conscience?
So I don't actually have a list, but I think I will start a list, because that's a good question. I think a journalist of conscience understands their situationality does that exist? Within a historical context. A journalist of conscience understands their power vis-a-vis the reality around them. So Linda and I, for example, when we come into, if Linda and I were to cover a breaking news story together, I think the way we would approach it would be with a kind of humility, whereas our colleagues may not come with that kind of humility. They may come with a level of arrogance that makes them think that they have all the answers already, whereas a journalist of conscience walks in with a profound sense of humility and curiosity, not knowing or believing that you have the story done and ready. So historical context, your situation reality vis-a-vis the story, and humility. And also, I think it's very important that you have a community. So at Futuro Media, we have a community of journalists, right? We're not in this alone. And I can tell you, for example, on our reporting about what we're going to release on the West Bank and Jerusalem, is that we will actually work, once we're done with our piece and we've already edited, we will actually work with another editor to come in to help us understand, who is an expert in the field, to help us to be more culturally competent in our reporting. So it's understanding that you are not the be-all, end-all in journalism, but rather that you are curious and want to work with other journalists to do your best work, as opposed to being very arrogant. And there's a lot of arrogance in journalism. And again, that's why so many of my colleagues were prepared to throw me under the bus, because I was just too immigrant-y. And now I look at them and I'm like, and where are we now? And then, of course, I look at them and I'm like, and who has the Pulitzer?
On that note,
Well, actually, before, so I've thrown around the Pulitzer, but we didn't say what it's for. So let me explain what and why it means so much, which is why I want to leave you with trust your gut on what is speaking to you as a journalist. So in the year 1993, I'm invited to a maximum security men's prison in Pennsylvania. And I go in to give a commencement speech, and when I'm there, I meet a young man who says, I'm a juvenile lifer. He was sentenced when he was 17 to life without parole. And he was very moved by my speech, and he said, what can I do? I'm here for life. And I said, oh my God, be my source. You're gonna be here for life. I'm on the outside. Tell me everything that's happening in a maximum security men's prison, because we don't know. And that conversation ended up leading to decades of conversations with this young man who was sentenced to life in prison without parole as a juvenile. Sonia Sotomayor gets named to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides that it is cruel and unusual punishment to sentence a juvenile to life without parole. And so they now reverse that, and that means that this person who I met, who I've been in touch with for decades, just hearing we reported on him here and there, then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, what a story. This guy could get out because of the Supreme Court. And we started recording all of the conversations at that point. And I had to fight to do this story within Futuro Media. Let me tell you, I had to fight. They thought I was silly because all that would happen would be that I would get phone calls from prison from this guy named Suave. But none of my team knew who he was. So they were like, Maria, what's this story about this guy in prison and what, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, again, I never gave up on the story. I always believed that there was something there. And so one of my producers takes the time to listen to the phone conversations between us, and she says, oh my God, there is a story here, but it's not a straight journalist story about this guy in prison. It's actually, we're gonna tell the story of a journalist and his source, and her source. And what does it look like when a journalist has maintained this relationship over 3 decades and has sent him Christmas cards? Was I crossing the line between journalist and source? Was I too connected to him? That's what we ended up kind of, apart from telling Suave's story, we also just kind of peeled that back. And for that reason, we won the Pulitzer. But that was decades in the making. I emphasize decades, right? So again, trust your gut. Don't give up on that story where you're like, oh my God, there's something here. Because if you have that glimmer as a writer or as a journalist, like Linda, her glimmer moments, the ideas that she has that she hasn't given up on, that she's had to fight for, those are the things that have then given her all of the awards and the recognition that have brought her here. So trust yourselves. And also, as I said to the young man here, you also, find your elders who can help you make the process a little bit more tangible for you. You're welcome.
Thank you. This was so inspiring. I love you. So good to see you. So good to just hang out here in public. But nice to hear you and see
I
you
love
and
the
inspire.
wedding story, though. That was adorable.
Yeah.
So that was worth it.
Do I know you? Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You forgot that?